Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, my guest is Dr. Ibrahim Turay. Ibrahim is faculty member in the School of Justice Studies at Lethbridge Polytechnic. He obtained his PhD in cultural, social, and political thoughts from University of Lethbridge. Today, we will discuss Ibrahim's PhD research on the interactions and experiences of Black youths with the Southern Alberta Police. It's a great pleasure to have you on my show, Ibrahim.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Dr. Dobson.
Ibrahim, prior to coming to academia, you were a parole officer with correctional services. What drew your interest to academia?
I've actually I started in corrections as part of my work within the criminal justice. But prior to that, I was working as a youth counselor in Edmonton, and then later on moved to the Southern Alberta part. I work with the provincial correctional system, which we have probation officers, which is the title that I ended up doing prior to coming into the academy. Within that caseload, I've had the privilege of working with youth in both Edmonton and Calgary in the young offenders centers. Moving on to the adult system, where I was as a probation officer and a senior probation officer, working primarily with individuals that police identified gang members, working with individuals that been charged but not convicted yet, as well as those that were convicted of domestic violence, assault related to domestic violence, violent issues. And so, yeah, so that gave me the opportunity to interact with a lot of youth and young adults. And, it inspired me to do my master's in Black youth, the factors that contribute to Black Canadian youth involvement in gangs. I think that's the start of my academic work, and so coming to Lethbridge College then before Polytechnic, just being within the school environment gave me that excitement again of wanting to go to school. So hence I decided to do my PhD.
For your PhD research, Ibrahim, you explored self-identified Black youth
Mm,
interactions and experiences with the police in Southern Alberta. Can you tell
mm.
us about your study?
Yes, so because of those experiences and so on, I wanted to look at when we think about agencies within the criminal justice system are so guided with policies, and so sometimes being within those environments, you have to work within those policy, your behavior, your actions, and so on, the structure. But I always see policies as something that at the bare minimum of what I can do working with individuals. And so I wanted to go beyond that.
Mhm,
And so the first idea that I had coming into the PhD program was to look at what police officers are doing,
mhm,
to improve their working relationships with youth, in self-identified youth in Southern Alberta. And I use
mhm,
self-identified youth specifically because myself, prior to coming to Canada,
mhm,
I didn't necessarily identify myself as a Black person.
mhm,
I would identify myself as a Temne in Sierra Leone. Temne is one of the ethnic groups of Sierra Leone. So I identify
mhm,
myself as a Temne prior to coming here.
mhm,
But here in Canada, I'm a Black man, you know. And so
mhm,
I wanted to give the youth that
mhm.
opportunity for them to identify
Yeah.
themselves. If they see themselves as Black, then for
Mhm,
them to identify themselves as such. And so through by those discussions, when
mhm,
you start a PhD program, you have ideas coming in, but when you have a committee with discussions and so on, will kind of change your
mhm,
directions. And that happened to me.
mhm,
Ended up with this topic, looking at the
mhm,
experiences of the youth from their own perspective. My work is
mhm,
informed by critical race theory
mhm,
perspective, that
mhm,
centralized race as a key variable
yeah.
in our analysis and so on. And so storytelling is important as part of a methodology within the critical race theory
Mhm,
aspect. And so I wanted to gather the youth, their own experiences
mhm,
from their own perspective when they interact with police
mhm,
in Southern Alberta. So
mhm,
that's how I landed
mhm,
on that topic of
mhm,
talking to youth and seeing
mhm.
them telling me their stories from their own perspective of
Mm,
their experiences with police in Southern Alberta.
mm. Can you tell us how you conducted your PhD research?
Yes. Absolutely. My methodology, in terms of the research methodology, I engage on
Mm,
critical race mixed methodology.
mhm,
The critical race mixed methodology, as I mentioned, is a combination of storytelling as a methodology itself within critical race and the traditional mixed method research, in that you have qualitative aspect of it and the quantitative aspect of it. And so with that, I did conduct some interviews. The approach that I took was a concurrent, so meaning that I was collecting had a survey that was running at the same time as I was collecting my qualitative data, the interviews that I
mhm,
conducted as part of this study. So
mhm,
for my own for this study, participants had the opportunity to answer qualitative questions on the
mhm,
surveys. For those that were interested in participating in both the surveys and the interviews, they had the opportunity to answer some of the same questions that I asked those that I interviewed online, and some of them may also choose to only participate in the interview aspect of it. So yeah, so those are some of that's the approach that I took, and I was able to collect the data through that process, interviews and surveys, perception surveys, and as mentioned,
mm,
asking the youth to tell me their own stories. For those that
mm,
may prefer to write it instead of
mm,
having a conversation with me.
mm, mm. Looked like a very extensive work you did.
It is, and if for those of you that have done PhD work, you
Yeah,
definitely know
yeah,
using two methodologies, and
yeah,
with that mixed method research
yeah,
involves you doing two
yeah,
things at the same time.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so you notice that in the
yeah,
dissertation itself how long it is, because
yes,
you have two methodologies, and
yeah,
so yeah,
yeah,
it was a lot of
yeah,
work, not
yeah,
only just analyzing the data from the quantitative aspect of it, but also have to analyze
yeah,
the qualitative data
yeah,
that you collected.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, because you were a practitioner and now coming to academia is like a different, it's like 180-degree change from, so
Yeah.
what was the learning curve like?
Eh, First of all, the learning, and as I mentioned, actually my work is informed by critical race theory and some
Yeah,
aspect of colonialism and settler colonialism.
okay,
And so when we think about from a colonial and settler colonial perspective, and we're thinking about some of these institutions,
yeah,
policing, the criminal justice institution as a whole.
yeah,
These are colonial informed institutions, and so being within that system, you've been conditioned to see
mm,
certain things in a different way,
mm,
different from the just general members
mm,
of society and so on. So
mm,
coming into the academy, I
mm,
have to do a process of relearning. You
mm,
know, I am originally from
mm,
Sierra Leone, which was a
mm,
former British colony.
mm,
The education system follows the British system of
mm,
education, and so all through you've been exposed to this
mm,
idea of the colonial aspect of knowing things. But I think for me,
mm,
the good thing, the opportunity that I had was that, when I leave the school environment, I am with my people, the elders, listening
mm,
to elders. So
mm,
you, from a colonial aspect, you're learning something from the
mm,
classroom from a colonial lens, but you also have the opportunity to hear things differently from a traditional
mm,
practice within your own
mm,
community.
mm,
And so I have to do that relearning process
mm,
as part of this project.
mm,
Hence
mm,
I did all my post-secondary school education in Canada, and
mm,
through that, I've never been
mm,
exposed to a
mm,
critical race theory until my master's program, where I was introduced to critical legal study. From that critical legal study, critical race theory came down from that critical legal study. And so once I was introduced to that the critical race theory, I read the theory, I read the propositions of the theory. It's like, yes, it speaks to me.
mm,
It speaks to me. So I have to do that relearning myself, because
mm,
myself to
mm,
decolonize my own mind, my own
mm,
thoughts
mm,
from that
yeah,
institutional aspect of it,
mm,
to do the work that I was doing, and it also
mm,
allows me. And so having that experience as a
Mm,
previous practitioner
mm,
gave me a different ways of seeing things and
yeah.
interpreting things,
Mm,
looking at the data and so on. So it has
mm,
both positives and negatives for me
mm,
in this work.
mm,
Because I spent a lot of my time in Southern Alberta here, sometimes it's just Googling my name, you will see that, oh, he's a probation officer, which
mm,
then, or former probation officer, which
yeah.
then may dissuade some of the potential participants because of the
Yeah.
fear of what could come, if
Yeah.
they share their stories with me
Yeah.
and so on. And so, but being also in this skin color
Yeah.
may also, for some, may think, oh, it may give you easier access to talk. So, which, but I think we're going to
Yeah.
talk about some of the limitations
Yeah.
of the study and so on. So, in such, being a practitioner gave me an opportunity for me to be able to interpret things in a different way. I
Mm,
know we can enforce the law in a
mm,
different way.
mm, mm,
And so when participants share their stories, I can see perhaps where things went wrong and what
yeah.
could have been done in
Yeah.
those approach that
Yeah.
you can still enforce the law, but you can
Yeah.
still do it in a
Mm-hmm.
respectful, ethical way
Mm-hmm.
and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Thank you
it
for,
took me process of relearning
yeah.
to be able to do the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, for sure. Ibrahim, what did you learn from your research study?
Yeah. When we think about Black people's general, and I use
Mm-hmm.
Black people loosely,
Mm-hmm.
their experience, especially when you think about police
Mm-hmm.
experiences with Black
Mm-hmm.
people's experiences from their interactions with
Mm-hmm.
police, they tend to be informed by U.S. Studies and
Mm-hmm.
Ontario studies beginning in
Mm-hmm.
the early 2000s. And
Yeah.
so nothing much from our own area here in
Mm-hmm.
Southern Alberta and even in BC, in terms of looking at specifically,
Mm-hmm.
intentionally asking the question,
Yeah.
using race as a variable in the analysis of those
Mm-hmm.
data tend to be something that is generally from the United States
Mm-hmm.
and cases from Ontario.
Yeah.
And so for me to do this work here, so one of the goals was to look at experiences of Black people from their interactions with police are just isolated incidents that are just located in the US or Ontario, nothing much from this perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at,
Mm-hmm.
when looking at it from a Southern Alberta perspective, I looked at Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Brooks, and Calgary, and
Mm-hmm.
wanted to see if Black youth in these different locations experiences are different based on where they find themselves and so
Mm-hmm.
on. So a primary thing that one of the key things that I found and from what finding is that black people's experiences, especially negative experiences from their interactions with police, are not just limited in
Mm-hmm.
Ontario
Mm-hmm.
or the US, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so although they're gonna be different, relatively things are different and so on. Which the culture and so if you compare even the US and Canada, just
Yeah.
because you can see those differences and so on, but it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't nonetheless, the experiences are very much similar
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how they experience police from their interactions and how they interpret their own
Mm-hmm.
experiences from police as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so gender
Mm-hmm.
influence the type of experiences
Mm-hmm.
that you experience from your interactions with police. The
Mm-hmm.
city where you are
Mm-hmm.
also inform the type of experiences that you get from your interactions with police. So, for instance, most of the participants that provided qualitative data that I analyzed were
Mm-hmm.
mainly from Lethbridge and Calgary.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at it, when you listen from the interviews, listening to when participants are telling their stories from their experiences, sometimes reading from what some for those that provided, you can tell the type of feelings that they're trying to express in their own explaining their interactions. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you are in Calgary, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
participants there tend to experience mostly what I describe as overt, physical police violence in the sense
Mm-hmm.
being handcuffed when you haven't done anything to warrant that handcuff.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't committed a crime for you to be
Mm-hmm.
handcuffed.
Mm-hmm.
I have about 30, 35, 34 to 35 participants that provided qualitative data.
Mm-hmm.
Among those, only two people that were charged with offenses and one was dropped after a lengthy period of time being in court in 2023 of those. And there is a story also that talks about the experience of Black people from the courts, the Canadian court system, and so on. But for my own study, looking at them and seeing, and so if you are in Calgary, you're likely participant there reported handcuffs, when they haven't done anything, pointing a gun at you. One story actually that participant, he was younger in junior high, when he had this experience of going to school in the morning, hearing the police shouting behind him, stopped him, getting to put his hands up, had a gun held at him, telling the officer that he was going to school. That didn't stop any of that experience. And later on, him catching the train and going to school. And when he said, I went to school, so, he took me by, like, you went to school? Like, how can you really make sense of something like this where you've experienced this? Held under gunpoint, going back to school. So it's like, how were you? When you went to school on that day, how do you survive? How were you?
Yeah.
And one thing that he said was he just talked to his friend, buried it behind his mind, and life goes on. So it can tell you in the sense that it seems like he expected that, as a Black youth, as a Black kid. This was a youth in junior high school having those experiences. And so whereas so gender as well in Lethbridge, a lot of the participants from their own experiences, they experience what I characterize as the covert form. And when you look at my dissertation, I try to create a continuum of police violence, wherein, it depends on what type of attitude. So if you have a disrespectful attitude, for instance, from your interactions with police, which can, by the way, having what may be perceived as a disrespectful attitude could be a response from the one that you receiving from the officer during a process of interaction in there. But and so one of the from the bottom of that continuum, if you have a disrespectful attitude, an officer perhaps may decide to either charge you for something that or not taking seriously a complaint that you're trying to tell them about. So any of those, I see them as a form of violence. Charging somebody when they're not supposed to, when you're not supposed to. I see it as a form of violence. Not taking their complaints seriously of them being victims of certain things. It is to teach them a lesson because they were disrespectful. Can also be as an example of violence, all the way to physical, perhaps deadly use of force and so on, which we didn't see as part of my from my participants here. And so here from Lethbridge tends to be that covert form where there's no physical put hands on you, put you on handcuff, but you still nonetheless you still feel that thing that you haven't done. And so I looked at it like perhaps the only thing that prevented being subjected to any physical forms of violence was they haven't done anything that could potentially justify those type of actions and so on. And so those are some of the finding. Gender as well plays a role, where women here from Lethbridge tend to perceive being dismissed, police being dismissive of them, not taking them, taking them seriously, those type things, which is also a form of violence, being dismissive and not taking some of the things that you're saying seriously in their own interactions and so on. But a very important thing that my focus was just on police interactions, but the youth that I talk to between the age of 16 and 30 draws me to their experience of not just being isolated to policing, but also looking at the experiences within society as a whole, including the school system. And it's important for the school system because I'm talking to individuals, that are in high school, junior high school age group. And so some of them still have experiences from way earlier into their own interactions with police and so on, that can be linked from school authority, calling the police on them. And there are a whole bunch of issues related to the school resource officers and so on within the school systems and those that. So those are some of the the key findings that I can think about here
Yeah. Yeah.
that came from my research.
Yeah. So when you're talking to this youth and looking at the data, like how does it make you feel?
And that's the beauty about using Craig-Gary's theory as a
Yeah.
methodology, in
Yeah.
that I see myself as I am part of the
Yeah.
story that I'm
Yeah.
researching.
Yeah.
I am a father.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm a father.
Yeah.
I am a black
Mm,
man. So
mm,
those identity, being
mm,
black, which is
mm,
racial,
mm,
being appearance,
mm,
being within a society where
mm,
blackness tends to be seen as a threat without
mm,
even, actually involving in anything.
mm,
So, so for some of them, when I hear their stories and linking those stories to some of my own experience being a parent within the
mm,
environment, the community where I am,
mm,
I can relate to the stories that they experience,
yeah.
they tell me. I can relate to those experiences. I
Mm,
can, and it also, that's part of story, that stories connect
mm,
experiences that may seem
mm,
to be
mm,
remotely not connected and so
mm,
on.
mm,
So, I was part of the problem that I was researching.
mm,
And so I feel the pain of those youth, and I think that's one of the most challenging. So thank you for asking this question. That was the most challenging aspect of
yeah.
this, the emotional toll. It's
Yeah.
not just the physical work
Yeah.
itself, but the emotional toll
Yeah.
it takes to do this work, because you
Yeah.
hear in kids the experience that could
Yeah.
be the experience of your
Yeah.
own kids, right?
Yeah.
Hearing them, and so growing up in Africa,
Yeah.
coming to Canada,
Yeah.
hearing some of those youth experiences,
Mm,
like if I was in your
mm,
shoe, I could have
mm,
been experiencing similar experience that you're talking
mm,
about. You're
mm,
talking about here.
mm,
So
mm,
definitely, yes, it was challenging to hear some
mm,
of those stories,
mm,
and so
yeah.
when you're doing a PhD
Mm,
and you're researching a topic that perhaps
mm,
may something similar to this, you may want to
mm,
think about
mm,
what type of activities that you can do outside the
mm,
work itself. So at
mm,
least give, even if it's a 15
mm,
minutes
mm,
break or half an hour break from the work itself,
yeah.
just to
Yeah.
find a way to reset and get
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
look after
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
mental
Yeah.
health aspect in this work. It's
Yeah.
really, really important.
Yeah. And I'm sure when you're coming back home, you're probably hugging your kids because I'm
Well,
sure your love overflowing because you see what happening and probably bring a little bit of scaredness.
and so you mentioned that being having that experience as a practitioner,
Yeah.
doing this type of work,
Yeah.
knowing I've been
Yeah.
within the correction system.
Yeah.
I know the processes when somebody get arrested and
Yeah.
put in prison,
Mm.
whether it's a
Yeah.
remand or
Yeah.
being sentenced. You go
Yeah.
through a whole ritual process
Yeah.
entering. And so
Mm.
you see those things. You wouldn't
Mm.
want any of your relatives, let alone your own kids, to go
Yeah.
through, friends to go through
Yeah.
those experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
Naturally, for me, I don't know, that could be a topic of
Mm.
research to talk
Mm.
to individuals that are
Mm.
racialized within the law
Mm.
enforcement community,
Mm.
and that are also parents, you
Mm.
know, because I'm always worried about my kids.
Yeah.
Worried in the sense, no, I don't
Yeah.
raise them to be scared of police. And like, know
Yeah.
what you're doing. Sometimes
Yeah.
you may do the best possible things ever,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
you your experiences can still be negative in some form, but do your best knowing that you've done what
Mm.
you
Mm.
you you were expected to
Mm.
do in not breaking the law, following the
Mm.
law, and doing
Yeah.
those things and so
Mm.
on. And so, as a parent, you always wanted them to be the best
Mm.
possible they could be,
Yeah.
knowing what you know.
Mm.
School, when you have kids going to
Mm.
school, the school system here,
Yeah.
which is what the participant from there, what they were telling me,
Mm.
if the way some of them, the stories that they shared with me from
Mm.
their experiences in school, if that, being a parent working in law enforcement, you hear those, when you hear complaints from school principals or school teachers about your kids
Mm.
not following, not doing things that they're
Mm.
supposed to be doing in the
Mm.
classroom, and knowing the consequence of, if they fail in school, the
Mm.
consequence perhaps could be a prison or whatever it is, those type things. So he wanted them to be good. He wanted them to get the best possible. So it's very easy for somebody like me to be hard on our boys. And so when you be hard on them, especially boys, but it can also be girls as well. When you're being hard on them because you're always hearing constantly from teachers complaining about how bad they are, how they're not following things in school. If they're experiencing racial discrimination, either from teachers or from their classmates within the school, they can't talk to school administration because school administration always perceive them as being in trouble. They can't talk to you because you've been nagged by the system so much that you're always on top of them, trying to get them to be good. They often left without a form of support. And that's the number one thing that I learned from this work, to listen to your kids. No matter how the school system they tell you how bad they are, try to make that balance of being getting their own perspective, the students, getting your kids' perspective and actually listening to them, what they're experiencing, so they can still have a form of support. Because if they can't talk to you as a dad at home, mostly dads tend to be hard. The kids, it can be the moms also can be. They can't talk to you at home. They can't talk to the teachers because they perceive the teacher being discriminatory. They can't talk to school principals. They're left with what? And so that's some of the things that I learned in this process, to be patient with my own kids and actually listen to their own stories and what they're telling me.
Ibrahim, your research also showed that the Black youth in Southern Alberta experience differential treatment from the police than that of the larger cities like Toronto.
Yes, and I think that's what I mentioned earlier before, because coming in here, looking at the literature, it seems just a US problem. Black people's experience is just a US problem. Negative experience from police is just a US problem. In Canada, it's just an Ontario problem and so on. Because Ontario, you have researchers that actually ask the question and analyze data in relation to. And so when we don't have much of the research here from this province, from the province of Alberta, and it seems like we don't have that problem, so we don't really study it. But it doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist, right? It's just that we don't ask the question of that. And so what I found from my own study is that the negative experiences are not just isolated in Ontario or the US so not necessarily being that they experience more of that compared to somebody from Ontario or somebody from the US. Actually, the study that I looked at that was a study by Professor Watley in Ontario, where they examine the serious incidents report, agency there of police interactions with Black people, and then they compare those experiences with Black people in New York, I believe. And so their conclusion from their analysis, it shows that if you're Black, you're more likely to be killed by police in Canada, in Toronto, compared to somebody in New York. And so when you think about it, we tend to hear a lot from of that type of police violence, death, and so on from the US, and not so much from Canada. And so for my own study, based on what participants shared with me, then it shows that those experiences are not just isolated in Ontario or Toronto specifically, but they also here different scale, which it doesn't matter to the individual that is experiencing those. They don't really care about yours is much more, it's much better, because which is the same thing that when we talk about racial discrimination in Canada compared to the US, we say, oh, Canada is better. But when you look at it, people that experience those racial discrimination, they will tell you it doesn't matter because, it's relative, right? Maybe the norm, we don't have things that specifically tell people to have a poster that says you can't come in here because of your Black. It doesn't necessarily mean that. The absence of that doesn't mean that racial discrimination is no longer, doesn't exist within the Canadian context. It's just a polite form of racial recognition. So that's the same thing in terms of violence, in that it's not open. Sometimes you may even want the physical already to get it over with. But when you think about it's gonna happen, you don't know if the actual physical violence is gonna happen. Because you're subjected on that intimidation and confrontational interactions. So for the person that is experiencing it, it doesn't matter whether you physically put your hands on them or get them, put them, subject them into that type of thinking, right? And so from my findings, you can see I try to classify participants' experience from a psychological experiencing, and also look at them from a physiological response. So physiological responses are those responses that they don't necessarily have control of. So say you're interacting with police and you start shaking, that's something that you don't necessarily control. It just happens. And that nervousness, when you're nervous, you start shaking, which can be interpreted as being you're hiding something. That's why you're nervous, and shedding tears, when you didn't even notice, you just start seeing yourself crying. Those are all things that I classified as physiological, or even feeling a sense of relief, at the end of an interaction. Those are things that feeling, it's hard to describe, but when you find yourself in a stressful situation and that situation ended, there is a sense of feeling the relief that you feel, of a weight lifted, those type of things. Those are all physiological things that I classify as some of the responses as impacts from their interactions, with police.
Yeah. So what are the implications of your research?
There are, I think, a lot of implications that are not just limited to the police. I mentioned that participants, when you look at the 5 themes that emerge from my data, that idea of white supremacy, that encompasses the legacies of colonialism, the legacy of slavery, and that captures the idea of it captures that Black youth experiences are not just, they are systemic. They're not just limited to one institution, which is the police, but they're limited. They see it, participants from it, look at the data, it shows that the experience, they see the experience are not just isolated from the police. The public call the police on them, right? When they know the public, as a member of the public that is calling the police on a Black youth because they were not happy on how a Black youth was talking to them or the interaction that they're having, knowing the role of police is to protect individual in protections and so on, that they will respond to that. So that's a form of violence that participants also experience, that it's not just limited to the police. But the type of behavior that we also, participants also experience in society, we as society, if we say, so we can just make the assumption that police work for society. They work for everybody. They should provide safety for everybody within society, which means they are working for taxpayers. And if you are a taxpayer, whether you're Black, brown, you are a member of that society and so on. And so for the participants in the study, they're saying, if society doesn't want type of experiences that they experience in police to stop, society has the power to make it stop, right? And so from that idea, so we have to look at the practices that we have within our educational systems. When we have police in schools, the only time that a Black youth in those schools, whether they junior high or high school or even elementary, for them to have they only interact, if we make it that Black youth only interact with police at school when they are in trouble, what message are we sending to those youth? And that the only time that you're going to interact with police is when you are in trouble. So we think about some of these programs, as a form of safety within the school environment. Yes, it is a form of safety, but I also see it as a cultural form of safety. Cultural in the sense that it's strange for me to see a police officer in school because I never had a police officer in my school. And Africa is perceived as the most dangerous place in Sierra Leone and so on. But it's foreign to me to see a police officer in school. It's also strange for me to see a police officer with a weapon.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
you can, but those are all cultural
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
so yeah, so policy implication is we should think about the practices that we have within our from the schools, from the general community to the actual agencies themselves. So and so some of those things create a form. Um, uh, First of all, looking at when we shouldn't be teaching Black youth in schools that the only time that they're going to interact with police is when they're in trouble, you
Mm.
know. And some of the implication as well is if you are a police officer or any law enforcement individual within society, if you do not have to stop a Black person for whatever reason it is, if you don't have to stop them, if you don't have to, don't
Mm.
stop them.
Yeah.
Don't stop them. Don't make them just because you feel like you have the power to do so. If you're gonna stop them, don't wait for them to ask you why you're stopping them. Tell them,
Mm.
be proactive, and let them know
Yeah.
um, what your intention was in
Mm.
terms of stop. If you don't have to stop a Black person for whatever reason, don't stop them. If you have to stop them, be proactive and let them know the reasons why you're stopping them. And I also wanted for police agencies to perhaps to be proactive and tell people what to expect from them, especially for Black youth and not racialized youth. When a police stop you, what you should be expecting from them. And that way, it's a form of a transparency that you know the type of what type of interactions you should be, your type of way of how a police officer to talk to you, what they should tell you in terms of when they stop you for, just the basic, because the interactions, those things gonna be tend to be different in terms of what the interactions were. But just to be proactive in that if I am scared when you stop me, you telling me the reason why you stopped me would create that sense of relief right away and don't be in that tense situations that may create certain ways of acting because there's some of the things from my study was the idea of performance, the type of things that Black youth tend to engage on when they're interacting with police and trying to present yourself that you're not nervous, trying to hold your hand so you don't shake and all those things and so on. So you can relieve that by being proactive and letting the person know
Yeah.
the reason why you're stopping them and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Ibrahim, what is your advice to future researchers who wish to explore this research topic further?
Yeah. It's a lot of work when you're doing a mixed methodology, but I think it's worth it. It allows you to not just see numbers, but you can
Mm.
actually put some context into
Mm.
that experience.
Yeah.
And so if you're not scared of the work, if you don't mind the work, still do mixed methodology, critical race mixed methodology approach in your research. If I am to go back and do this again, the only thing that I'll do different in terms of the data collection from the
Yeah.
qualitative aspect of it is that actually using Black youth as research participants,
Okay.
researcher, co-researchers,
Mm.
assistants,
Mm.
my using them as research assistant, them interviewing
Mm.
themselves,
Mm.
because I think if a Black youth is talking to their own peers,
Mm.
maybe the peer may be willing to explain or tell them about things that they may not necessarily be
Yeah.
willing to tell me, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
yeah, using the youth themselves as research
Mm.
assistants
Mm.
will be a great thing that I will do differently
Mm.
from the time. And we are researcher bound by research
Mm.
ethics boards and so
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And so, but when you're talking to Black youth, especially from experiences with police, I think we need a different way of doing things. Trust is important. People need to trust
Mm.
you. People need
Mm.
to make sure that to know that the information they're sharing with you is not something that's going to be used against them. So you have to build that relationship first before you start asking them,
Yeah.
talking to them questions about your research. But that's not something
Yeah.
that is allowed within the current.
Yeah.
It's most of the institution that I
Yeah.
was in terms of research
Yeah.
ethics, you're not allowed to have
Yeah.
contact with participants prior
Yeah.
to getting those approval. But
Yeah.
when you're working with Black youth, especially from the experiences
Yeah.
with police, you need
Yeah.
to have that prior
Yeah.
relationship first.
Yeah. Yeah.
before you
Yeah.
can talk about.
What is next for you, Ibrahim?
Well, I teach. I've been teaching within a school of justice for the past almost 10 years now.
Mm,
And so I intend to be within the field of education, and intend to continue with this line of inquiry, and hopefully can be able to influence students, not only being interested in taking on the work that I'm doing later on, but also for me to be able to train some of those students as well. I've been fortunate to have, over the past 10 years, to some of my students, some of them are current police officers now and doing in various
nice.
fields. But of course, it's my goal has always been in that I only always looking for being able to influence one person within that classroom, because I know that one person can have approach and methods, a way of dealing with people in multiple ways that can benefit a lot of people and so on. And so yeah, I have hopes for the students that have been in my classes and actually learn something, because you can sit in class and hearing things, but if they don't make sense to you, they will
Yeah.
not make sense to you, because
Yeah.
my approach is different.
Yeah.
My teaching is informed by critical race,
Yeah.
settler colonialism, and that settler
Yeah.
colonial mindset. So I may not see the same way, the
Yeah.
same things as they may
Mm,
be experiencing from
mm,
other
mm,
places and so. But that's the beauty of being within education, learning.
mm, yeah.
So I would say to the agencies, allow my students
Mm,
to bring something new within your
mm,
organization,
mm,
because they may have ideas, but of course somebody is trying to start a career. If the environment is not created for them to be able to share some of the learning and actually implement some of the things that they've learned, it may take a long time for them to be able to be in a position of power to
mm,
allow them to make that. So I want to continue with it within the educational system, training students,
yeah.
students that perhaps can continue this line of work. Yeah.
Thank you for your time, Ibrahim. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.